Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and today's guest is Ontario Attorney General and Member of Provincial Parliament for the riding of Barrie, Springwater, Oriel, Medonte, Doug Downey. Thank you for a second virtual visit with us, the first being around this time last year, which now seems so long ago. And so much has happened in that time, and much of that river that is provincial governing flows across the desk of the Attorney General at some point in the process. I have to ask you, how is the water?
Well, it's still moving. It's, there's so many moving parts. And you're right, a lot of stuff comes across my desk. It's such a privileged position for me to be in, to be able to give the risk assessment on so many different parts. That was part of the job that I didn't really appreciate early on until I was in the seat, that the department, and it's really the largest law firm in the country, is what it is, and the second largest land manager in government provincially. It's quite a large department, and we do risk assessment on absolutely everything that goes forward. So it's going well.
Well, one thing is for certain, we are certainly glad to have you in this position, in this chair. Certainly a year ago, like it or not, ready or not, you were thrown right into it. And, if nothing else, you were certainly put in a position where you had to see what you were made of. But the last time you were on our show, we got a bit of a summary of all the things that you've been doing to modernize the judicial system, make court appearances and remand, all that virtual and electronic, and certainly keep the process moving. But now, obviously, in your last comment, you just advised how we're also one of the largest landholders. And that's really what we wanted to talk to you about today, and that is certainly infrastructure, housing, affordability, those types of things. And you recently had a bill that was amended, I believe, as well as a bill brought forward by one of your colleagues. And I'd love you to give our audience a bit of a summary on where we are today.
Yeah, you know what? This is, before I was a minister, I was allowed to bring forward what's called a private member's bill. And so all non-cabinet ministers, including the opposition and the other parties, can bring forward bills on any issue. And often, it can be something like Greek Heritage Month, or it can be something, meaningful to a particular constituency. Well, mine was on the Planning Act, which, as a real estate lawyer, was something I dealt with on a daily basis, and it affects all walks of life all around Ontario. But the drafters, the people who actually draft the actual words for the legislation, pretty early on sent a note back and said, this is the most complicated, complex private members bill we've ever seen. It's really detailed. It's fixing a lot of traps, a lot of ways that people get caught up in arcane rules, or rules that don't necessarily make sense. And if I can give sort of the example, sometimes, when you're traveling down a road and there's a jog in the road, it's really because they started surveying from two different ends and they ended up somewhere, and then they had to, there's a kink. So it wasn't on purpose. It's just there. And that's what was happening in the Planning Act. These kinks were in it, and it was causing people tons of grief. I can give you all sorts of examples of those types of things.
And I would think, like, much of that act was developed over 100 years ago with regards to land and surveys and such. Is there stuff within this, like, just to boil it down, that the viewers should want to look forward to, like things that are going to bring the opportunity of home ownership closer within reach for people? That's what the people listening are going to want to take from this.
Yeah, it takes a lot of red tape out. So if somebody's going forward to get a severance, to take property off property, there's some remedies in there that make it more affordable. In terms of the biggest retail piece, I guess, the biggest piece that will affect people, and they don't know this, which is why it's a problem. Mm-hmm. If you have two pieces of land beside each other, and one is in mom and dad's name and the other is in mom's name, and dad passes away, unless it's a whole lot on a plan of subdivision, like in the view behind you there, Mike, unless it's one of those kinds of developments, mm-hmm. then those properties are going to join and become one lot.
Really?
And you see this with cottages all the time. You see it with particularly rural properties. I had an instance when I was practicing law that exact thing happened, and 100 acres joined down in New Tecumseh, and we could not get them reseparated under the current rules. So they ended up having to farm the 200 acres jointly. with family members. And that kind of thing, that's not good land planning. Nobody meant for that to happen. This act, when it's passed, will say that a property won't join if it's only due to the death of a joint owner. And so it's those kinds of fixes.
And I think that's tremendous. Funny, you just gave me a deja vu, a flashback years ago to college, where that was in one of the courses and it was on one of the tests. So thanks for the refresher on that one. We always shook our heads with regard to it, so I'm glad it's being addressed. Now, if we might, though, I mean, we really want to get into some of the challenges that Ontarians, regardless, as you said, of all walks of life, regardless of what municipality or region they're living in, we are facing some really tough challenges around affordability. I believe it was either yourself or one of your colleagues made a comment something along the lines of, with the way things are going, I'm not sure if my kids will be able to afford a home. And it might not have been you, but I think actually it might have been Member of Parliament Shipley who made that comment regarding his son. And it is a real issue. But certainly there is no Canadian housing market. So the definition of affordability for those who are selling out of the GTA and moving to regions in the surrounding area, including Barrie, they may or may not be feeling the exact same type of pinch. And so affordability and that pressure really drives the prices up with regard to low supply. So Mike and I have been talking about over some recent episodes about what could we truly be doing differently. And Mike, you had a comment that I thought was fascinating about what the federal government had really proposed was really quite counterproductive. And I want to throw it over to you.
You put me on the spot there. What was that?
It was around making it less affordable, Mike. Sorry. With the stress test, Mike. Sorry about that. Okay,
well, of course. Yeah. No, you threw it over to me on a Monday morning here, and I just had to think back on that. Yeah, that's the stress test. Some of the actions at the federal level in order to kind of get a hold on what's happening in the real estate market is to make the situation more difficult for people, make it harder to get in the door, and that'll quiet the market a bit. And that's an approach that, as a realtor, I don't like. I would much rather see us tackle the root problem, which is we have a low supply of housing stock in Ontario. Certainly, it's lower than demand. And a lot of the things you're talking about, reducing red tape, is certainly going to make it more attractive for developers to want to build in this province. Do you see the efforts of this government contributing to a greater housing supply, which is going to really help a lot of the issues?
We got to go to break. Stay with us on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We'll be right back after this break.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and our guest today is Attorney General Doug Downey, who is the MPP for Barrie Oro-Medonte Springwater. And before the break, we were talking about some of the actions at the federal level in order to kind of get a hold on what's happening in the real estate market is to make the situation more difficult for people, make it harder to get in the door, and that'll quiet the market a bit. And that's an approach that, as a realtor, I don't like. I would much rather see us tackle the root problem, which is we have a low supply of housing stock in Ontario. Certainly, it's lower than demand. And a lot of the things you're talking about, reducing red tape, is certainly going to make it more attractive for developers to want to build in this province. Do you see the efforts of this government contributing to a greater housing supply, which is going to really help a lot of the issues?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go back a step in terms of the stress test that you talked about earlier, and I'm not sure that that's helpful for people getting into the market. And I was fearful, almost downright fearful, the federal government was going to bring in capital gains on principal residence. They've been talking about that for quite a while, and I think that would be a mistake. I think it'd be a big mistake, because if we're trying to get affordability, we're trying to get people in, we need to make sure that the input costs are lowered. And that means making the process for the builders smoother, get rid of duplication, get rid of unnecessary steps, make it so that they can get into the ground faster and get homes up. It's that's what we're tackling with red tape. And we're on our third red tape bill of our mandate, tearing away rules that make no sense, that they've gone past their prime. That some rules are there and people go, why is that there? Well, I solved a different problem that doesn't exist anymore. Or it's now a duplication with something else. You talk to anybody that wants to try and build their own home, let alone try and build a subdivision, the steps they have to take and the costs they have to take before they even break ground. We've got to deal with that side of it.
Yeah, well, one of the things that just didn't make sense to me as well, and sorry, I know you're not speaking for the people at a federal level, although you are communicating, but certainly not in Ottawa, and that is how short-sighted it is to do this capital gains tax when, if you look back, we've seen the erosion of CPP. We know that OAS and CPP are not going to be there certainly for future generations, and the days of getting in the corporation that has the well-funded pension plan are certainly in our rearview mirror. And for some people, the only opportunity to live any form of retirement that is not impoverished is to have some opportunity to have some equity built up in their home. And so, again, the long-term plan or the long-term vision just doesn't appear to be there from what I can see. What I'd love to do, though, real quick, is just ask you, one of the things that we saw certainly when the Premier first took office was an observation of the amount of inventory, of real estate inventory that was held by the provincial government. And it was a staggering amount that was either considered what do you call surplus or vacant or underutilized. And certainly now with COVID, again, we have more employees who are working from their home offices. One might think that, again, there's more opportunity for vacant buildings or vacant real estate, and that there was a suggestion, whether it's through the school boards or provincial real estate portfolio, that we could do some form of conversion for affordable housing. And I'm curious, I haven't heard much of an update on that. Do you have anything?
It's something that I think about in terms of the buildings that my ministry looks after. You're right. People are working from home, or they're moving out of cities. You talk to local real estate agents, as you guys would know, or even the lawyers, and you're dealing with more lawyers from Toronto who are helping people relocate because of the cost. I think there's an opportunity here to rethink how we're doing things a little bit. And we have to keep our eye on the ball for affordable housing right across the board. I think that's incumbent on us to do it. You don't have to look very far to see what the cost of a house is in our area. It's gone up significantly.
Yeah, and it's opportunity, for people working in government, if they could go to work outside of the GTA at the same job. Obviously, their cost of living is going to be a lot less, given the affordability the further you move out of the GTA. And further to what Arif says, like taking a step further, not just purging, some of the government real estate within the GTA, but I would think when a lot of that was set up, it was at a time where it was important that these services be located in a big city, because we didn't have things like the internet and Zoom and the ability to work remotely. There's opportunity to move a lot of the government services, I would think, to disperse them throughout the province. And it would be cheaper for government to operate with that. And again, it would provide so much more real estate for higher and better use, being affordable housing.
Well, you touched on one thing, which is the services. We need broadband. We need that service, and our government has put the largest investment, $4 billion, the largest investment of any government, including the feds, into expanding broadband, and it's critical. You think about going back even 20 years, if you had a phone in your house. Well, of course, everybody had a phone in your house. Well, you've got to have broadband to be able to work.
And high-speed broadband through satellite is now the thing that I think is going to predominate in terms of internet availability in remote locations.
I'm watching that. Yeah,
that's going to be a big one. Now,
COVID, in terms.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to take it to a different note for a moment here. COVID's left many displaced and frustrated employers and employees landlords and tenants, as we know. Do you anticipate that this is going to result in a rise in legal actions and possibly insurance costs for Ontario residents stemming from all of this?
I don't know about the insurance piece. I'd have to think about that. In terms of legal costs, my ministry has actually brought in, I've announced a $28.5 million investment in modeled on the BC tribunal system to help landlords and tenants resolve their issues. The resolve rate is very high. It's a 24/7 portal. It's really quite, it will revolutionize how people interact. And it's my intention to land that, have it operational this year. So we're well underway, and it will change how people interact to help them resolve it and not have to go into head-on fighting about it. Right. Because sometimes there's just a piece missing, or it's a pretty exciting reform of tribunals.
So a form of mediation is that what I'm hearing, or
it's an online. If I can describe it as if you both go online to your own private chat room and you can upload documents. You can have an interjection by somebody who's knowledgeable to say, I think you're fighting about this, but here's what the rule is on that, and help educate the two so that you land on the actual issue instead of the perceived issues.
Yes,
it makes it faster and it makes it cheaper, and it gets people resolved in 60 to 90 days instead of 6 to 9 months.
Fantastic. On that note, we do have to go to break. So when we come back, we'd love to pick it up. Mike, you got a question about something just north of the city borders. I got a question about something right down within the built boundary and about remediation. And so stay with us on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And again, our guest this week is Ontario's Attorney General and Member of Provincial Parliament for the riding of Barrie, Springwater, or Medonte, Doug Downey. Thanks for being here, Doug. Almost as quickly as we started the show, we're sort of on the last segment of the show, and we're going to have our people call your people to get you back in here. One of the things you were talking about, though, is about affordability, addressing the root cause, though, and that is in supply. And one of the things that's been haunting, I would say, a lot of municipalities is that quite often it's easier to build in farmland or easier to build on a fresh parcel than to remediate something from decades ago that maybe has left a stain or environmental contaminants. And that's expensive. That really is expensive. And I'm wondering about, from your perspective, we often talk about it's cheaper, more beneficial, certainly in things like law and order, if we can provide funding up front so that we can help our residents avoid hospitalization, incarceration, legal costs, et cetera, that it actually pays for itself. Well, why not take that same approach to remediating soil? Why can't we get an investment, an agreement between all levels of government to invest in remediating the soil to make it more affordable to build and address the housing supply?
I think that creating an incentive to reclaim that land is important. Different lands have different challenges, and so their ultimate use, whether it be commercial or whether it can be residential, is a good question. It's a core challenge, and we do have to create rules and regulations that fit, that create an incentive for people to do that. I know you'll remember, the brownfield legislation was brought in many, many years ago, and really the history behind it, this legislation, was to allow Toronto to bid for the Olympics. And so that legislation came in about 8 months. But then the first regulation wasn't written for 3 years because they weren't going down that road. I think we do need to continue to push in the modern day to create a regime that allows people to reclaim, because we want to do infilling. We don't want to skip over it.
Yeah. Oh, there's affordabilities to it. I mean, we've said before on this show, the infrastructure is there. The services are already there for in-town brownfield properties versus, annexation lands where you have to then put in all brand new infrastructure. So I think the cost savings in that offsets a lot of the brownfield there.
Let's not forget, though, Mike, as well. It's also, it is good for the environment. I mean, some of these properties are lakefront properties as well. You've got leaching, et cetera. So, just putting it out there.
Yeah, I want to ask you if I can to switch hats now from your provincial role to your role as MPP and ask you a question relating to your riding, and that is about the Automotive Innovation Park that is underway, or at least in proposal for your riding of Barrie, Springwater, Oro, Medonte. It holds a lot of economic promise locally. I've heard recently in the news that the Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority has asked that they be compensated $3.6 million, which they deem as an ecological offset charge. Never heard of that before, but should this project go forward, does that claim hold merit, do you believe? And could this hold up or even put a kibosh on this entire project?
Well, it's an exciting project. Let's start with that. The ramifications are huge in terms of employment and attracting partnerships with Georgian College, and just so many people can benefit from this development. So I'm a huge fan of it. The developer's gone through the process with the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. They've issued a decision. There's an appeal that comes out of that if he chooses to the minister directly, or to the LPAT, the new OMB. So he's in that process. So I can't get into the merits of it too much. But just to say that it's a great project.
Yeah, for sure.
I for one, I won't put words in your mouth, Doug, but I'd love to see what the justification. I'd love to see the line items of that $3.6 million ask and where that money goes. And it's not to say that the conservation authorities don't do remarkable work and commendable work. It's a big ticket item, and I'd love to know. Just be interested to see where that goes and how that might impact the ability for this project to go forward. So I'll leave my thoughts there and won't ask you to comment on it.
Well, I can tell you it was the beneficiary of a MZO, a municipal zoning order, to help, again, cut away red tape. It came with the support of the municipality, as they always do. And we've had several in our area. There's one in Elmvale for seniors residents. We've had about 4 now. Actually, the Rolling Stones only got to play when they played because an MZO was issued. So, Minister Clark with Municipal Affairs is really proactive on these types of things, and they wouldn't be as far as they are without it. So I really, it's a good way to propel these developments forward.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Arif.
I was just going to comment that certainly around Burles Creek, one of the things that I do remember coming out of it was, talk about sort of the whole world coming in, and it's basically was the mecca of Ontario for a minute there. And there was rightful skepticism about how the lands would be left once the party was over. And if there was one thing that I remember being a takeaway, the organization, the coordination with Ontario Provincial Police, the cleanup, the number of volunteers that they had, and the residents as a whole said it was so well handled and very done in such a respectful way that they would welcome it again. So
yeah, the owners are world class. There's no question about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Doug, it's fair to say that this may be as close as Arif and I get to the top provincially to ask a question. So I'm going to ask you, and you tell me if it's fair or not to ask, your prediction of a point in which we might see a full reopening for the province of Ontario.
Ooh,
well, I can't give you a straight answer on that because it's a work in progress. As you know, we're in uncharted territory. But I can tell you this, by the end of April, we're going to do exactly what the Premier said we're going to do. And we're going to hit 40% of adults vaccinated, everybody over 18. 40%, that's pretty fast. And we're going to keep moving at that rate, more than 100,000 a day. As long as supply lands, then we'll get needles in arms, and that's going to make a massive difference.
Yeah.
Well, I will mention to you, I've talked to a few people who have had the opportunity to go and get their vaccination done, and they said that the rollout was phenomenal. It was polite, it was pleasant, it was organized, et cetera. And so, certainly in that regard, those who are on the front lines of rolling these programs out are doing an incredible job.
Yeah,
we do have to wrap this up. Mike, final thoughts?
I was just going to say, with regards to that, is I keep reminding people, this is 100% of the population we're looking to inoculate here. And I think back to a time when we tried to create a gun registry in this country, which would have involved probably less than 5%, and what happened there. So I'm quite happy with the progress
Mr.
we're
Attorney
making.
General, I do have to say thank you very much for your time once again, making time in your busy schedule. Really appreciate having you on the show, and we will see you soon.
Great, we'll do it again.